Hello, everyone. Welcome to our special Cybersecurity Awareness Month podcast. Whether you're tuning in from your office, your home, on the go, whether I'm wishing you good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, we're thrilled to have you with us. For those who don't know me, I'm Brandon Peters, Virtual Chief Information Officer at F12.net. My job focusing on melding technology, business, making sure you get the best of both worlds so that you can be safe and productive. I am joined today by my co-host, Vaughn Male, our Security Operations Analyst. Vaughn, please tell us a bit about your interest in security and what brings you here today.
Thank you. So I'm a security operations analyst with F12, and I've been asked to join the call to speak for Cybersecurity Month, or Cybersecurity Awareness Month, rather, and what that means for us over here. In terms of security, I specialize in securing small and medium-sized businesses in Canada. So that's understanding all the different compliance requirements, struggles of those businesses, as well as the unique challenges that come with that space.
Perfect. And for those who haven't had the chance to work with Vaughn, Vaughn is one of the unique special ops or security operations people we call in if there ever is a breach. So he's going to have lots to share with us around what he's seen. He's seen a lot of different things and really excited to have you here today, Vaughn.
Thanks, Brandon. It's great to be here.
So today we're going to dive into some crucial topics that will help you and your business stay secure in this ever-evolving digital landscape. Please grab a cup of coffee, sit back. Let's dive right into it. So one, I think the thing that always catches me, I don't know if off guard is the word, but when we talk about Cybersecurity Awareness Month, we're dedicating 31 days to something which really is a full-time job. We have to stay aware, stay vigilant on these type of things. And Vaughn, when we talk about cybersecurity, like this isn't something that ever sleeps. This is something that is always on the rise and only changing and getting worse day by day.
Yeah, it's something that's 24/7, 365. It's a continuous process, and cybersecurity as a whole changes day after day, and it's changing faster and faster. So the idea of spending 1 month out of the year to focus on it's great for awareness and for getting people involved, but this is something that's it's a continuous process. I wish I could only work 1 month a year.
Yes, it'd be great to be able to take that home. Basically, if you were essentially the opposite of teachers, I guess.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
we look at this and we're talking about like the awareness. This isn't something that ends here. We do encourage everybody, and I know a lot of the businesses that we protect, we put in a lot of cybersecurity training, privacy awareness elements in their business, and even that's often not enough. I encourage anybody that I'm talking to on a regular basis to stay informed about what's going on in the world. I know earlier this year what was happening with London drugs as a great example, a very Canadian focused example, was something that was really interesting to hear about from what happened there. Vaughn, maybe can you, I'm not the right person. I'm interested, but tell us a bit about what you saw happening there and some of the learnings that we saw come out of that.
Yeah, London Drugs, as you know, we think of it as kind of a cornerstone business. We don't think about it, you know, being a large network of computers, but to an attacker, it really it is. And how quickly and easily they were able to shut it down, and because they lost multiple days of sales, and it's not just London Drugs. I mean, MGM last year was compromised after a 10-minute phone call. So these are organizations that have deep pockets, they have large cybersecurity budgets, and you might be a little concerned hearing that they too can be compromised. But really, there are some good protections that can be done that are relatively inexpensive, that can protect you at the best of times and at the worst of times. And I think that we've got some kind of plans to talk about how we can guide people through that entire process throughout this conversation.
Yeah, definitely between like how to respond to an incident and combining that with a little bit about what's coming and some of the tools that you can take into 2025 and beyond is going to be where we end off here. Now, you did say something about London Drugs in particular that I want to highlight, and that was something that I actually applaud them for is they took the time to shut down. I think there's
Hmm.
a lot of businesses that don't. They try and remediate these things while their plane is still in the air, and that can be quite disastrous. So yes,
Hmm.
there's that business hit to them, but it lets them get ahead of things and make sure that they're doing what they can to stay safe. So definitely want to applaud the team over there for that and making that stance to focus on the security and the privacy elements instead of bottom dollar over everything else. And I know there were conversations and data leaks. I mean, maybe this is one of the things that we can jump into right away, talking about how these types of things work when we talk about things like, um, oh, Vaughn, you're going to have to help me. It's for those who aren't aware, we're recording this on a Friday, and I maybe have a bit of a Friday brain. It's the double, um, not the double fraud. What's the word for this, Vaughn? Where
Double
they're,
extortion.
yeah, exactly. And I think there was an element of that within the London drugs case. There was data released as part of this.
Mhm. Yeah, there was customer data, and one of the things was you mentioned kind of applauding the team over there. One of the things I would like to highlight as to even why we're discussing it is that they were fairly open throughout.
Yeah,
When they shut down, the news articles were that London Drugs is shut down because of a cyber attack. They were very open, and that's not the norm. A lot of times when things happen, and a
yeah.
lot of times when I hear about breaches out in industry, they are not publicly disclosed. There may be a legal requirement that's fulfilled where they maybe send an email to some of their customers. Lord knows if anyone ever reads it, but or they'll write a blog post about it on their
Yes.
website, which uses very general language. But this is something it's something that's happening daily, all around the world. And if you use any resource like Ransom Look or anything like that to see what these threat actors are releasing,
Mhm.
um, it is it is overwhelming at a worldwide
Yeah.
scale.
One, being open about it provides that additional lever against these bad actors because now they're not able to twist the screw, or let's use screw for that conversation.
Hmm.
They're not able to drive this home in a way that they feel like they've got you in the spot where they want you. If you're taking that ownership and being open about it, takes away that second threat of the double um, extortion, the
Hmm.
sorry, I'm going to take that again one more time so Kate can edit this in. It takes away that added threat of the double extortion where all of a sudden they don't have that leverage over you because you've been open about it, you've been honest, you've taken the steps you needed to report it, to make sure that there is that visibility, and that has its own kind of power, especially in a situation like this.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I would like to highlight is ultimately, like, yes, these are cyber attacks and there is a technical
Mhm.
component to it. A lot of what these threat actors are trying to do, and a lot of how they make money, which is their primary objective, especially in those cases, is with fear. Yes, they might encrypt your
Yeah,
files. Yes, they might steal data, but really what they're good at is scaring you. And London Drugs was like, by being very open about it, was first off, as you mentioned, they're demonstrating that kind of those scare tactics probably aren't going to work.
we don't negotiate
Um,
with terrorists.
exactly. The other part of it that's you know a large component of reducing fear is educating your staff so that they're aware of
Yeah.
what's happening, having a good like being prepared for an incident so that you're not making emotional decisions during a very stressful time, and having good tooling in place so that you can respond to things and we're not, people aren't trying to deploy tooling in the midst of a
Mhm.
compromise where they're doing everything else on top.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into something I think is very important to talk about around the cyber aware workforce, being able to put this training in place. Training is a big piece that I definitely want to get into and touch on in a moment here, as I know you do too. But I think the piece that is often missed is making it an environment where people feel comfortable and supported to come forward if something like that has happened. We talk about it at
Mhm.
the scale of something like a business or a corporation, but right down to any of your staff, your employees within the organization, it goes a long way if they feel comfortable to report it, and in a way that it's not being covered up or hidden from the public, which we've seen. I've had people share stories with me where you see chief information or CIOs, CEOs, executives within businesses that are putting out these threats about, like, if you get compromised, you're fired. That's almost the
Mhm.
worst thing you can do in a situation like that, because it is going to lead to those elements of cover up and um, lies and misdirection. And I think it's one of the biggest reasons why we see the lead time to detection being as high as it is when you don't have some of the tools in place, like managed detection and response, that we can touch on later on.
Mhm.
Would you agree on that type of a statement, Vaughn?
Yeah, part of awareness is also awareness around how to have those conversations. I've heard similar stories to you, even regarding not just compromise, but like even fish testing. A
Mhm.
lot of people are concerned that, if they fail a phishing test, they're going to be out on the street. And the conversation that managers should really have should be more with that kind of educational focus in mind. These aren't, punitive action unless they're going out of their way to introduce risk to an organization is probably
Right.
not the approach that you want. The approach is really just open conversation. What was it that made you think that that was the good link to click on? Because
Yeah.
these attacks are quite targeted now, and same with the tests with all of the AI integration. Um, they're getting quite targeted, and there's really it's
Says
not
the
there shouldn't
person
be
who designs a lot of our internal tests. I know you've got quite the penchant for designing these things, and people have come to you being like, wow, like, well, that was pretty intense. But it's not like you're doing it any differently than these bad actors are today.
definitely not. I utilize open source intelligence. What I can learn about the organization from the internet, I learn about. I find example emails from the correct
Mm,
organization. And there's really, I tell people if they click on one of the links that we send out, there's no shame. That took me all day in some
yeah.
cases. I spent a whole day trying to trick you. So there's no
Yes.
no worries about if it actually. I'm sorry that I did, but it's part of my role.
I feel like that's a bit of a sorry, not sorry, Vaughn.
I suppose, yeah,
Yeah.
you could say that.
Yeah. I mean, you've identified something. I think there's absolute value to that, where you're doing this on a training level, and you're enrolling people, whether it's in-person training, if it's a managed program like Know Before. These things they only go so far if you're not
Mhm.
testing. And testing becomes a pretty important element of it to keep that vigilance and that awareness at the forefront.
Yeah, exactly. Same way that they would teach us stranger danger as a kid.
It's a
Uh,
good that's a good point. Yes.
or even like the DARE program or anything like that. You need that reinforcement and that training where they give you an example so that you can run through it. And similar to how we were talking about the threat actors, how they utilize fear against you, and how being prepared is able to kind of limit their actual attack surface against you as a person by undergoing regular phishing tests. People aren't going to be afraid when they see one. They're going to see it. They're going to recognize what it is, and it's more
Yeah.
than just fish tests. It's utilization of password managers, how to generate good
Right.
passwords, what that looks like, and utilization of MFA, which is still in year of our Lord 2024, almost 2025,
Mhm.
something that is still in some cases an uphill battle to get out there.
Yeah. Or don't pick up the USB that says company salaries on it that just happen to get dropped on the floor. Like these elements that are more than phishing, as much as it might be one of the leading or the leading
Hmm.
cause for compromise in this day and age. And I think the thing we tend to forget is, no matter what security controls you put in place, the human element is still a factor. There's still part of the chain of how this works. And let's face it, people have bad days. We're not going to be in a situation where we expect everybody to be perfect all of the time. I mean, to
Hmm.
err is human if we want to keep on with the Brandon cliches in this conversation. And we need to reinforce that. We need people to feel not like it's okay to make a mistake, but that if they do, there's a support element for them to bring it forward, to help them to be that supportive level. I think really being able to show that they're participating, that they have learned, that they're taking those steps in place. Like you said, Vaughn, and I think it was a really key thing. It's not simply learning to spot a fish, it's learning these good hygiene elements. And you're honestly so good for it. I think you've even come by and been like, hey, Brendan, I just quickly like closed your notebook. I noticed you had something that might be sensitive on it. And I even miss thinking about that sometimes. So having that element, and this is so key for F12 being one of our core values of we've got your back, having those people that are willing to watch out with you and be
Hmm.
your buddy on this journey that we're on together.
Yeah, absolutely. Having an organization that specializes in just navigating these waters. I feel like cybersecurity is overly obfuscated as it is. People think
Yeah,
it like it at the end of the day, they feel like it's a lot more complex than it is because there's so many acronyms and you know, you we I'm guilty of this too, but I really like using the
yes.
shell for everything, and I really like to use I really like to say, you know, an ephemeral environment that makes it sound like I'm doing actual magic, but it's a lot of it is kind of same as you know, medicine, right? Medicine can be really complex, but
Hmm.
I'm not sure about you, but certainly there's been times I've gone to the doctor about something and their questions are you sleeping 8 hours a night? Are you eating X number of meals per day? Are you eating well? Um,
Have you
and
rebooted
just
your computer in the last week?
yeah, and
Have you
the
done
cyber
patches?
yeah,
Yeah,
and this especially with patches for cybersecurity, it's this kind of good and it's kind of hokey, I guess, but this sort of like homegrown wisdom about how to take care of your business and your environment. Have a plan, ensure you've got business continuity, ensure your people know what to do, ensure that you can, you know, keep the lights on and everything paid. Um, in the same way that you have an alarm system and you lock the door when you know,
yeah.
close up shop at the end of the day, you want to make sure that those computers are also locking when people get up and leave their desk.
Yeah, and I mean, let's talk about like building in business resilience and some of those policies and those elements that you can get into because I mean, you talk about how we obfuscate this, especially with like our acronyms and the thing we use. I think some of the mythologies that the IT industry has created going back to the dawn of time, which as everybody knows is January 1st, 1970, is something that we can help overcome nowadays. I mean, there was a point in time where it was when you finish work for the day, turn off your computer because it's more secure. It's not left on for somebody to hack into. And that was, I would say, one part a sign of the times where we had computers directly connected to internet and we didn't understand the security, sure,
Mhm.
but also an element of just being I lost my train of thought. I'm going to take that again. It's one part an element of it being like a sign of the times and how people were connected directly into the internet. They had it directly on their computer. The modem was built into it. It was their computer was what was directly going online, and it did have some of that exposure, but it was also an element of from a productivity standpoint, you're coming up clean, fresh every day. The downside being very much so if the computer's off, how are we patching it? How are we making sure that your antivirus is staying up to date? How are we doing some of the additional threat detection if something is living on that environment? If there's backups, if you've got a key system that's running, the backups typically aren't going to be running during the day. You want to make sure that it has time overnight to do that. I mean, this is one part policy, one part education as well, right? I mean, it's all well and good if you've got a policy and you say, hey, everybody, it's your job to read this, but if you're not living it every day and pushing it through, it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, and it's we don't work the same way that we used to. And what's interesting, kind of part of what interests me the most about working with the SMB or SME kind of area for cybersecurity, is that's where a lot of innovation happens, and they tend to like smaller companies have that ability to pivot and change much more rapidly than larger ones, and particularly people who work in that space don't work the same way like they did
Hmm.
10 years ago. You don't come in, you don't turn on, reach under your desk and you've got to press the Dell Optiplex power button and you can feel it spring loaded. And then everything kind of fans whir up as your screens turn on. We don't work like that anymore. A lot of work is done on laptops, cell phones. Um,
Hmm.
Being a millennial, I still have in my mind that there are laptop tasks that need to be done. Um, which is kind of an old person way now of thinking about it. The Gen Z and soon Gen Alphas will just do things on their phone because they can, and there's
Hmm.
why pull out another device. And work is going to continue to change kind of more in that direction. And so, yeah, at the end of the day, people with laptops, they finish the day and they physically reach up and they close the lid and they pick up their laptop and away they go. And if they have a busy day the next day, they might prep for it at 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night. We need to make sure that the device is protected then and at that person's
Yeah.
home.
Yeah.
Or if they have a family member unfortunately pass away and they have to travel to go and deal with that, which is a very common situation, that person needs to be able to work securely because they may be gone for an extended period of time.
And I think it's great that you use that as the example. And I know to some people it might seem like, oh, why are they focusing on something a bit more morbid? But in an instance like that, you're not thinking about the security controls. You're very much impacted by what's going on in your life and your world and your family. It shouldn't be something that has to be on the end user to have to think about all the elements, or at least not in a way where they have to spend a lot of effort and energy doing it. It should be something that is either automated, which I know is a big topic of conversation you and I have. We're both big fans of automation from a security and productivity standpoint. And two, it should be reinforced. It should be something that's communicated, talked about very clearly, concisely. Let's avoid too much of the legalese in some of these policies, because what we are ultimately trying to create is an understanding of best practices and ways of staying safe, both for yourself and for the company. I mean, when we talk about protecting the device when it's at home, if you take some of these learnings and you apply it to your home life as well, great. We're all going to be better off for that. And I think it's interesting, two things that came out of what you were saying there as I was thinking through it. When we talk about how differently we work nowadays, we had a pandemic that kicked off in 2020, lasted for,
You don't say.
well, some people might say we're still in it. I don't know. But obviously that changed things very much towards the remote
Hmm.
work and working from home. But we've also, I mean, can you imagine, like when you were growing up, like you mentioned, you're a millennial as I am as well, and you're growing up in the 1990s. Can you imagine being like, I've got a refrigerator that's now connected to the internet so I can check cameras to see if I've got milk? Like when we talk about it, we are living in the future in a way, but no, this is technology that's connected. This is something that can be remoted into in order to access that. It has vulnerabilities. We might not know when those vulnerabilities are, but can you imagine a world where your company got compromised because you didn't take that type of security into account and somebody got in through like a home speaker or a, like I say, the refrigerator thermostat? How many things are connected in this day and age when we talk about the IoT or the Internet of Things?
Yeah, and I mean, we always use the example or the phrase, keeping the lights on as an example, but I had an issue quite recently where I had company over, and I had to install updates on my light bulbs, and so I couldn't turn the lights on, and so I had we had to wait. So, uh, you know, that might be a little bit more literal, but all of this
Yes.
stuff does impact your ability to actually keep the lights on, to keep doors open.
Mhm.
All of that stuff now is connected to the internet, and you need to make sure that, in the case of your doors being open, is your network properly segregated so that that door isn't on the same network as your guest wireless, so somebody can just sit outside your building and unlock the door. These are technologies that we implement for convenience,
Right.
and oftentimes security is viewed as an inconvenience, and I understand why.
Yeah.
But um, these convenient tools do present some deal of risk, and there needs to be, it's not inconvenient if there's planning, it's only inconvenient when there hasn't been planning and protection, and it all needs to come in after, and then you know you can't lock your doors because the device
Right.
that they connect to has been compromised, or because
Yeah.
the internet doesn't work anymore, and it gets quite scary at that point.
Well, and it's funny, like I apologies to my parents in advance because I do like to use them as my examples. They know this. Uh, they were traveling recently, and I find that interesting when we talk about protecting the home, but sometimes the work gets done outside of the home, where we're now in hotels, airports, other forms of transit, or maybe in cafes because we needed a space to work. Something was, maybe there's renovations going on at home, but the office, is in another city and we're a true remote worker. You can't trust some of these public networks, these public systems out there. So making sure the staff are aware on that front when we talk about it, but enabling them to work in a secure way. And I got a phone call from my mother uh, start of this month, start of September
Mm-hmm.
actually, where, Bran, I should have called you sooner, but this is something that we didn't think of. We've been trying to get on the internet since we got to this hotel, but the cell reception has not been great, and so we can't even tether to our phones for the internet. But we've had a busy day. We want to kick back. We want to watch Netflix. We want to connect to the Wi-Fi. It's public Wi-Fi. It's unsecured. Is that okay? And I had to pretty emphatically say no. I mean, probably 90% of the time nothing's going to happen, but 10% is a pretty big number when you're talking about these types of things. And by the way, not pulling this from any research, but it is something that probably more often than you would think somebody's on that network sniffing, trying to get those credentials. Yes, we have multi-factor authentication in place, but using multi-factor authentication on a public network that's being sniffed is a good way to get that multi-factor authentication compromised. These are the
Mm-hmm.
types of things that people have to think and have to have that level of awareness at all times. Have to understand, okay, well, what is the difference between a public network and a privately secured network? These types of elements don't always make it to the forefront, and people think, I just need to get on internet and do my work. They don't think about the impact that it might have beyond that.
Yeah, and it's more than just the internet too. I don't know. Have you ever played with SDR, Brandon?
No, I
Software
haven't.
defined radio? Okay. It is scary. The amount
Oh,
of
good.
stuff that
October
is
happens to
just,
also be Halloween, so we're on track
yeah,
for hitting
exactly.
both of those.
But the amount of stuff that's just being transmitted. Next time you come up to Edmonton, I'll bring some of my tooling and I can show you.
I think I
Um,
have heard some of this now that you're putting it into context, but yeah, please go ahead. Like this now
um,
fascinates me.
but the amount of data that you are just wirelessly
Yeah,
transmitting. So when I went down to DEF CON last month, I had a Faraday bag
yeah.
to make sure I had no like unwarranted electromagnetic transmissions,
You didn't want
because
to end up on the wall of shame.
the wall of sheep this year that I was
Yeah.
looking at, I've got a picture and I can send it to you from the device that they were using, but they were collecting information that was just being wirelessly transmitted from devices. You don't have to join a wireless network or anything like that.
Mhm.
It was purely proximity, and I mean, they could have gotten a stronger antenna and just had not have had that proximity restriction, but they didn't do that. And you know, people's passports were showing up,
Mhm.
um, bank cards, their phones, all of this data that's just wirelessly emanating from your person like an aura that you don't see, but it's kind of like the unseen world. So there's that whole component of it as well, is leaving everything turned on your phone all the time, particularly when you're traveling. I mean, the Canadian government recommends that you turn your phone off when you travel internationally or when you go through TSA, because they, those organizations reserve the right to record all of that and get access to anything they can connect to as it comes through their security. Um,
And with wallets
so
becoming the digital wallets specifically becoming the new trend. Like people want these ready and accessible so that they can be scanned at a moment's notice. So they're transmitting so many of these things, and it's not just money. It's not your
No.
cards, it's your passports. Like I think that's a really good one when we talk about things like identity theft. And I mean, this is not new. I mean, maybe the
No.
scale and the scope of it is something that's a bit more new, but you heard about this with garage door openers, people intercepting those, or if it was a
Yep.
fob for a building that you weren't protecting, you didn't have it in your Faraday bag, as you're talking about, or at least some sort of um, uh, near field communication, NFC blocker, or something of that sort that you can make sure it's not broadcasting, then you don't know what you're
Mhm.
leaking out to the world unless you're the one who's scanning for it.
Yeah, one of the devices I can show you, and I mean as an example, I'm using this as an example
Mm-hmm.
to kind of contextualize that because people understand the physical space much better than cyberspace. But
Mm-hmm.
um, when you have your phone, if you just run into a building really quick, you probably don't grab your phone, put it in your pocket. You probably still leave it charging in your car or something like that. That's not an uncommon action. And
Right.
you understand nobody can see it's there. There's not going to be a threat. They're not going to know that you've got this expensive device with all of your banking information on it and personal information on it in your car unattended. But what thieves are doing now is they are using a directional antenna on like a porta pack or something along those lines, and they can scan a parkade and they can see where all the Bluetooth devices are using BLE. So even if you disable Bluetooth on your iPhone, you're
Mm-hmm.
still using BLE because they don't allow you to opt out. And they can see where that device is, and they know that that phone is in that car, and they know to just break the window and go in and grab it.
Yeah, and we're going to have to get into that a bit when we talk about how you can stay protected. But like some of the other elements, and I'm reaching for this right now as an example, when we bring it back to the business and talk about the business level of security, we're also dealing in the world of like the quantum computer and the direction we're heading there. And I'm holding up right now a pretty old school USB Type A connector, which is massive, almost 3 times the size of what we're seeing on the Type Cs right now. These can be computers nowadays, and we're seeing
Mhm.
that even within like I know that there's tools that I've been studying online where people are swapping out the standard white USB-C or Lightning charger with something that has a computer chip in the end here that starts gathering that information. So this is why you have to be careful about what's being plugged in. And when we're talking about it in this case, yeah, there's one part security awareness, training, that level as well, but having those safety nets in place that can catch those when staff aren't thinking or they think, you know what, I'm in a hurry, I need to just get this done. So I'm going to plug in this cable from somebody had it at this
Yeah.
conference or whatever the case might be, and having those protections and policies in place to have that second layer. It's not one layer. Cybersecurity is never one layer. We you and I had a conversation earlier this year where we talked about the onion and the onion router and the things at the dark web, but well, there's reasons that they choose that type of imagery for cybersecurity, is that it is multifaceted.
Yeah, and you want to make sure that you have protections everywhere. Talking about physical space again, if you ever go on a tour of some old castle, it's not just the castle walls, it's the moat, it's the shape of the stairwell. They've got little holes
Yep.
to pour boiling water through. Like defense in depth is really what's going to keep you protected. And it also provides mitigations should something fail. Should they breach the walls of the castle, you've got, they can't get to the top of the tower because of your stairwells, or, they have to challenge the moat. Make it as difficult as possible, because when we're responding to incidents, attackers make it as difficult as possible to remediate.
Hmm.
Um, because they know that remediation is the one thing that they don't want.
They
Um,
build the persistence. They get as many footholds as they can. They try and get as wide as they can.
yeah,
I mean, if we use
absolutely.
that
And
same analogy, you're not attacking the wall in one place. You're trying
no,
to get into it through several different places. Maybe you're going underground. Maybe you're trying to scale the walls. Maybe you're trying to
hmm
break down the gates. And these are the things we have to think of. And if we're using that same analogy, it's not a matter of, oh, well, I've got the best in class, according to CNET, antivirus out there today, which I think at one point in time was Kaspersky, which I found really interesting because it was based off the emotional index of how it felt to purchase Kaspersky, which a lot of good that does you when you're being compromised. But it was something that only covers that one facet. That is
Mhm.
only the moat. Maybe it's not even that level. Maybe it's just the fact that you've cleared a lot of the trees around the wall.
Yeah,
Something more basic. We have to start thinking about this in multi dimensions.
yeah. You have to start thinking about looking at it from every angle and
Yeah,
trying to see it from an attacker's perspective.
yeah. And that's interesting because it's traditionally been somewhat of a wild west in the IT space. It's been something where people have been able to do what they want to do. There's white papers, there's seminars, there's information that's out there, but there hasn't been that level of requirement. Um, Big shout out to what I would like to now call our friends in the insurance industry for really starting to drive a lot of these changes forward and setting these requirements towards cybersecurity insurance and the businesses that are really driving for the need to have something like cybersecurity insurance. I want to shift and talk a bit about some of the compliance legislation, these elements that are coming into place. I think this is one of the biggest changes we've probably seen in the last 3-4 years is the fact that people are actually having this thing enforced, whether it's from insurance levels or even more recently, the government.
Yeah, and I mean, um, thanks for bringing up the government. We're not going to get political, but
This is
um,
not the time that we want to be doing
no,
that, especially for our friends down south. Yes.
yeah, so not it's not even a political matter. I mean, these are non-elected officials that are determining that the age of best practice and well, everyone's going to want to do what's best for their customers hasn't worked, and regulation is coming. We're starting to see it with they're introducing certification processes that organizations have to go through to maintain their D&D contracts. And I know when I talk about this, a lot of people are scared that they don't already have something like that.
I want
Um,
to stop you there for a moment because we just talked about obfuscation and acronyms.
sure,
D&D, if you could throw that
Department of
out there a little
National
bit.
Defense,
Yeah,
the
Department of
Army.
National Defense, not Dungeons and Dragons.
No,
It's a
no,
different D&D that we're
yeah.
talking about here, right? Okay, good.
Yeah, so the Department of National Defense previously hasn't done too much to validate the security of their partners. And a few years ago, the US Army released a paper introducing what's called CMMC, um, and which is another certification to determine the organization's
Cybersecurity maturity
maturity.
model. Yeah.
Yeah. And um, essentially what they stated in that document was that the US Army, as big and powerful as it is essentially nothing without its small business partners, because that's where innovation happens. Those are the people who can make the runs of this highly specialized nut and bolt that they need. Um, Large organizations are not doing that,
I
and
think
they are complete.
Mitsubishi, as an example, back in 2019, somewhere thereabouts, had a compromise. And when people think Mitsubishi, they're probably thinking cars. Maybe they go to TVs. In this case, it was missile data that was
Yeah,
compromised and leaked out onto the dark web as a result of a compromise.
yeah, and I assume that like there's those videos that this guy makes where he asks like an organization that somebody like Rolls-Royce and goes like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
you guys make cars, right? And they're like, yeah, but our main business is jet engines.
Right.
Like most of those large companies are involved in that space, but at the end of the day, what they've acknowledged is that you know all of it falls apart without their small business partners. And cybersecurity has traditionally been entirely focused on kind of 60% of the economy, which is government and large enterprise. Small to medium enterprise, which makes up the other 40% or so, has been largely ignored. There's not a lot of um, really. useful tooling that was originally designed. In the last few years, that's been changing, partly because of that document that was put out. And now the government of Canada is also getting on board and saying, okay, if you want to have a Department of National Defense contract with us, which is a lot of companies' meal ticket,
Mhm.
you have to go through this evaluation. You have to be compliant with, and at this point in time, they haven't released what they need. They've just said in 2025, which we're a couple months away now, you need to be basically compliant with NIST Special Publication 800-171, which there's a lot of terms in there already. But if you open up that document, it's just 100 pages of terms like that. Most
Mhm.
small companies are going to really struggle with trying to align with that. And
Yeah,
then those companies, their supply chain also needs to be confirmed to be secure. So they're going to be
of
sending out
course.
questionnaires and self-evaluations. And then we have things like bills C-26 and C-27, which are causing a lot of confusion in the cybersecurity world right now. I know when I've gone to attend talks with like the local OWASP chapter um, about these bills, people get very concerned about them because essentially everybody is impacted, even large companies, small companies, um, where anybody who touches anything close to critical infrastructure. So that's the companies who put the lights on the bridge, that's the people who do road maintenance. That's what critical infrastructure is. The
The
people
people
who,
that monitor those elements to make sure that they are being maintained.
yeah, the people who need to fix the pipes in
Yeah.
Calgary for the water.
Mhm.
That's probably not a large
Low blow, Vaughn.
organization.
Low blow, Vaughn.
But all of those organizations now need to have a certain level of
Right.
cybersecurity. And
Yeah.
previously, there was just no regulation about it. And when I talk to people in government at the federal level, they are very, very concerned about what this means, not just for our economic security, but for our national security, because there have been attempts at breaches that could have led to a loss of life, which is something that we don't often think about with cybersecurity and
Yeah.
how often a computer is just keeping somebody alive.
Well, or even a level of, I mean, that's for sure, absolutely,
Hmm.
but also a level of how much the error of one business could impact a life, whether it's financially
Yeah.
or privacy, other privacy information, just because they were a customer or consumer of that product base and not through any negligence of their own. I mean, there has to be these level of controls that are put in place by businesses. The businesses that are providing these services ultimately must be held responsible for maintaining the security of the people who use their services, which is, I mean, we can avoid, like you said, the political conversations. We can stay out of that, whether government should be involved or shouldn't be involved. And these bills aren't designed to be things that override people's ability to like freedoms or anything along those lines. They're meant to be these guidelines that are honestly, they should be easy to comply with. These are things that are designed to be have a plan,
Hmm.
have a cybersecurity or an information security management system in place so that you're prepared if something does happen. You are doing what you can to mitigate those risks and prevent these things from happening in the first place. This is not being prescriptive. This is not saying you must have a SIEM, you must have MDR, you must have EDR. Actually, no, let's go to XDR and talk about extended defense and response. We are talking about something as simple as investing time and yeah, money comes along with it as well in terms of the products and the things that need to be put in place, but not doing anything is no longer going to be okay. And I think it's really interesting. You mentioned Bill C-27. One of the elements in there is some of the fines for people who are found to be not compliant. And again, this is very hypothetical at the moment because it has not been fully published or fully recognized. But if it comes out, the number that they're talking about for a fine is 3% of your previous year's revenue, which incidentally, most studies, most analyses that you talk about, 3% of revenue is roughly what you should be spending on information technology and information security combined. I mean, they're starting to break it apart, but traditionally it's been 3% of your revenue spent on this. So why not do it in advance? Why not make sure you're staying
Mm-hmm.
safe? If there is this fine that's being added to it, this is again in addition to any ransoms that you might be hit with if you are being double extorted, if you're talking about the level of elements that go into remediation, the cost to do the remediation, the downtime, like we mentioned previously, for some of these businesses who have been compromised, the reputational hits, which absolutely cannot be quantified, but nonetheless are there. And some of the statistics back this up. We're seeing things from Verizon on their data breach report where they're talking about 60% of small, mid-sized enterprises do have to close their doors. They go out of business within 6 months of a major security incident. 60%. Like
Yeah.
that's a very real number to take back. And it's something that's staggering to me if your business and you don't think about the people you serve, that's inexcusable. But in this case, you're even talking about you're not protecting yourself, you're not protecting your staff, your livelihood. 60% of businesses in the small mid-sized enterprise that get compromised no longer functioning after 6 months. Sorry, I should say 6 months after a major incident.
Yeah, and I mean, the average response time, like remediation time for a ransomware incident, ours is lower, thankfully, but industry average is 72 days. So most organizations, I mean, unless they have some substantial windfall, probably can't keep their doors closed for what is that, 2.5 months, 3 months? Yeah, about 2.5 months. Just because of somebody halfway around the world thought that they would get a quick buck by going and running some software on your servers. Um, and they'll probably, for a smaller company, they may or may not be caught. There may or may not be any kind of punishment that you can rely on, uh, or closure. It's just your business is gone. And I mean, me and you have worked with small businesses for a long time, and medium enterprise, and we know that there's a lot of heart in it. I know when I used to work
Mm-hmm.
for a large Fortune 500, nobody cared, especially at the executive level. Um, but when you're talking about like SMEs, there's a lot of heart in it. Like those, yeah, you might have a 25 person organization, but you know those 25 people, you've known them for a long time, and there's a certain amount of pride that you have in
Yeah.
that they're supporting their families because of the environment that you've created. Um, and especially in the case of a family business, there's even more of that level. And when we respond to an incident at the SME level, like for the business leaders, for the business owners, the there's a, a lot of pain and guilt that they feel when these incidents happen. I mean, if when we go on site, people will, there might be some employee he's just got his hands in his pockets. And I remember one time there was a guy who was just standing outside kind of kicking the dust in the parking lot because there was nothing else to do, and he was just kind of feeling down, and it was just that posture kind of Charlie Browned over with kicking little dust clouds. And the business leader was kind of watching him, and just the disappointment on his face because they were a blue collar business. They didn't rely on the computer. They didn't think about it. But the second they can't pay their staff, the second that they can't, process orders, in some cases, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of this operational technology is actually in place to keep people safe or to keep your equipment safe to use. And if you look at examples like Stuxnet, we know that there are attackers out there, maybe more complex attackers, but there's attackers nonetheless that target that specific type of we think of it as hardware, but it's got a computer in it. In many cases, it's connected to a network.
Hopefully it's a newer computer. Hopefully it's a newer network. Hopefully it's got those protections in place, but it gets overlooked so often.
Absolutely. I mean, me and you have been in enough medical offices looking at some
Mm,
30-year-old Unix machine that's, keep responsible for doing the most important work.
yeah, yeah. No backups, no security software because it's no longer compatible or whatever that case
Yeah,
might be. 100%.
absolutely.
And I think we've done hopefully a good job of outlining the risks and the landscape and talking a bit about it. But I think the thing that we need to focus about on as we bring this home is to talk a bit about what happens if you do get compromised. And I think the strongest message that we can put out there is don't panic. Don't give in to that fear that is being weaponized against you. Take that breath. Reach out to your IT team, your managed service provider, F12, if we're fortunate enough to be able to serve you. Talk to them, get the advice. Don't immediately give in to the demands. Don't immediately start trying to delete or cover up or anything like that. I think really it's one part steadiness, one part communication.
Yep. Have a plan.
Yeah.
Um, Leaders of businesses, I understand that quite often, they get up, they get in their car, they drive off to the office, and they don't fully know everything that's going to be in their day, but they're the person who has a plan. And should there be a day where the thing you have to do that day on top of everything else is, negotiate with a foreign gang, it's not what you signed up for. But if you have a
Mm.
plan in place and you have somebody to talk to, you've got insurance, you've got that can give you access to a lawyer and to pay for the remediation cost, all of that gets so much easier.
Yeah,
Um,
I think you've done an excellent job when I've been in conversations with you on that level, Vaughn, about making sure that people understand those risks and understand those elements. You're usually one of the first to suggest bringing a lawyer into the conversation to understand um, the legal ramifications of this to make sure that that element is being taken care of because as much as it is a result of something that happened within the technology stack, it involves more than just the technology stack when we're talking about remediations for the business.
yeah, we want to make sure that, and people sometimes get quite concerned when we recommend that they communicate with a lawyer,
Yeah.
but there are a lot of privacy laws out there, and there's more in some industries than in others. Um, like obviously the insurance industry would have a large amount of privacy regulation, but technically if there's been a privacy breach of your organization, it needs to be reported to the government, and you need to make sure that the language that's used is correct, um, because we know how governments are and we know how lawyers are, and we need to make sure the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, that the appropriate agreements are in place, um, to kind of cover your butt should, as an example, something they'll quite often target is like the payroll system when they get access to
Hmm.
extort, because they know you've got social insurance numbers of your employees, you've got all of your customers' information, credit card information, everything like that. That stuff getting compromised is a fairly severe privacy breach, and you need to be able to report that to your local privacy commission, um, to kind of cover your butt. If you don't, there's also a string of punishments that can come along with that.
One, it's also equally important to make sure that you're notifying your supply chain if you've detected a breach. We've seen instances where we've had customers reaching out to us because one of their software as a service vendors, cloud software vendors, has been compromised, and some of the data that's held within that tool is personal or private data of the customers of the company that we serve. And yeah, they chose that person or that entity as the person to provide that service to them, but they haven't had control over the data in the same way. So how liable are they for that? Elements of, or if you disclose the breach, then it can be communicated to others within their organization and down, up and down the supply chain to make sure that, okay, we've been compromised. If we get emails from the person or the organization at the level that has been compromised, treat those with an extra level of scrutiny to make sure that we're being there. Have your own security controls in place, especially when it comes to things like approvals for wire transfers, money orders, things of that nature that are being held in place. I mean, IT can do some of this for you, but I mean, if you're approving it internally and it only requires one person and it's a junior accountant, there's probably a bit of an improvement that you can make to that process to revamp that.
Yeah, nobody likes getting those calls of, hey, I emailed somebody $100,000. That's never a fun one to get. It's always very stressful.
Mm-hmm.
And there isn't really there are technical controls kind of on the banking side with like the Swift banking system and things like that. But in some cases, people will ask the bank to just let it through anyway because they know what they're doing and they don't think about it until it's too late.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yeah, there's certain protections in place, and sometimes that money can be recovered by the banks with some of the delays that are put in place. But all too often, most of it leaves the country. Think about McEwen University in Edmonton, and it being one of the most infamous stories, at least in our region. Of, yeah, I
Hmm.
think it was like something like, was it
Six
something like a,
million,
I think it was 11 million.
really?
It was 11 million that was transitioned, and I think they ended up recovering all but 6 million. Well, I mean, there's about half that ended up making its way out of the country because it went to countries without extradition laws in
Mm.
place with Canada. So uh, they were able to recover some. I think they were able to recover a bit more over time. They might have gotten it down to 3 million, just under 3 million, but it was still something that they ended up losing. Like, these are numbers that if I lost personally, I would be devastated. Maybe they can handle it a bit more, but I'm sure that it wasn't part of their budget. I'm
Definitely not.
sure
And
it
it's
was
the
not built
students
in.
that pay for it.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Just like it is a customer in any relationship that ends up having to pay for it, whether it's through the loss of that information, the fees and the costs being increased in order to account for some of the remediation work, the loss of access to that service, which could be quite integral to a business or to a group of customers on a personal level. There's so many different elements. So I think the first thing, like we say, when you're compromised, make sure that you're doing that communication so that everybody's aware and can start doing their own protections. Make sure that you're calling the IT or security organizations with whom you deal on a regular basis to make sure they're involved. Make sure that everybody knows where the plan is and that you're working off that plan. None of this cowboy up mentality. We do not need to be going off script for this. And unless there's a need to. I mean, not everything is 100% predictable. There's a lot of things that we haven't seen yet, and we will have to respond to that in due course. But we have a plan for a reason. Refer to that plan, bring in the experts, do what you need to do to make sure that you're keeping everybody safe.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we're, I think, in a unique spot where everybody's been looking for, I think we always are looking for the silver bullet or, the magic potion that can make sure that we stay safe. We're getting closer. We're seeing more and more of these coming in. Unfortunately, I always like to liken cybersecurity to the arms race, right? Like it's that old itchy and scratchy
Hmm.
cartoon opener from The Simpsons where it's like he pulls out a knife versus a sword to a gun to a shotgun to a semi-automatic to a bazooka, and it just escalates from there. And that's really where we're living in this day and age. And fortunately, we can talk a bit about some of the tools and technologies that are coming out in order to protect us on that front.
Absolutely. And we need more tooling and more automation. Because I was reading a report, I don't know if I ever sent this to you, Brandon, but it was a survey that was done in the UK where, I mean, I know this is going to be released maybe in a week or two, but I assume cost of living is still going to be a
Mm.
problem. And they were asking people, what's your plan for cost of living?
Mm.
And about 10% of people just said cybercrime.
Mhm.
It's like the inflation is at the point that there's always going to be a certain percentage of the population that does crime, and there's always going to be a certain population that's going to be driven to it from economic circumstances. Once again, not to get political, but um, they're essentially it's a little bit easier for some of those people who are forced into some of those situations to revert to cybercrime because they can do it in the comfort of their own home. And unlike some of these traditional, thievery tactics like muggings or, Lord forbid somebody become a highwayman nowadays, but you're not physically confronted
Yeah.
by what you're doing. It's just text on a screen and then numbers go up and they don't have to worry about it. So we've we've been doing a lot of focus on kind of the human aspect from the victim because that's really what's the most important. But part of the reason why this is becoming so pervasive is because of how tempting it is for people who are in those tough economic situations. And that was 10% of people in the UK. I'm sure if you go out to some oblast somewhere where the primary industry is the asbestos mine, that number is even higher.
Mhm.
So I'd be, we need better tooling out there, and especially in the SMB space, because for so long, vendors have ignored them.
Yeah, and I think we see elements where we talk about the average fines. I've seen different numbers bandied about, and I think it's largely because they're talking about different uh, business segments in different countries at different times. One of the numbers I've seen for the small business space is the average ransom being around $146,000.
That
Um,
sounds low.
it does to me as well. I think we're creeping up closer towards the 2 million on
Yeah.
the average in Canada on these, especially when we're talking about some of those larger enterprises. That's why I was saying, like, I think it might be it dependent on the network segment as well. But let's use
Hmm.
that $146,000. And I want to do this for a few reasons. One, it's a lot of money. It's still a tremendous amount of money, $146,000. I mean, this is something that it would be life-changing for most people.
Oh
But
yeah.
if you take this away, I mean, we're talking $146,000 Canadian, and you take that into a region you're talking about where their currency doesn't go as far, it ends up being stretched much more because now that $146,000 might translate into something like 5 million, 10 million. Like this might be the score that gets them to a point of being able to retire and live a comfortable life or gain entry into another country to pursue those. Like there's so much incentive for the people to turn to that. There's something I go back to a call I had when I was more on the front lines and received a phone call from somebody who was, I mean, shows a bit of the age here I get, but they were
I'll picture it in black and
perpetrating
white.
the
Yeah.
yeah, they were. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, let's get the vignette up here. But no, they were
Yeah.
talking about it being, oh, CRA, you have to pay your fines. You've got all these elements, and I went, oh God, are you serious? Is this stuff still working? And he went silent for a moment, and he went, I just wanted to let you know, sir, I've made $50,000 today. It was noon, my time here in Alberta. So if that's where his target segment was, where he was hitting, or if even if he was focusing on North America, that could mean he'd only been doing it for 2 or 3 hours and made $50,000.
Yep.
I mean, you talk about how nice it would be to only work 1 month. Imagine if you only had to work 1 or 2 days. And this is the reality that people are being faced with, where they can dive into it at a level of, the quick and easy cash grab, or people who are industrializing it more, where we start talking about things like ransomware or cybercrime as a service being sold on the dark web.
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, imagine that as your 9 to 5. But you're getting into a point in time where there is this easy access to money, but we need to do what we can to combat it, whether it's through awareness or through some of the tools. I know one of the things we work with very much is something like a managed detection and response,
Oh
When we
yeah.
talk about the things that we've done traditionally, we talk about antivirus, going back to kind of that arms race that I was mentioning before, and antivirus traditionally in the 90s, early 2000s being this element of definition-based security where it's, is it this worm? No. Is it this Trojan? No. On and on and on, maybe hundreds of thousands of different definitions that it's scanning through really quickly. It's impressive and helpful until it's not, until it's something that hasn't been seen or defined before. And when we refer to something as a 0-day breach or a 0-day virus, malware, whatever the case might be, and even talking about it in terms of malware and viruses in this day and age is becoming antiquated because it might not be something that's software driven. It might be behavioral. It might be
Hmm.
somebody who's actively perpetrating it against your network, who's actively living off the land and a vulnerability or a tool that they've turned back against your organization to gain further access into other elements of your network. Uh, these are things that are more and more becoming the norm. So we have to take this shift. We have to shift away from this definition based, this what we know, and we have to start looking for behaviors. We have to start looking for the heuristics and the approaches that people might take. I like to give the example of no matter how hard of a worker you might be for your business, you still need to sleep. Circadian rhythms being what they are, you're hopefully sleeping at night unless you are on a different shift or a different schedule. But let's say you're somebody that we know doesn't work past 10 o'clock, and all of a sudden you've logged in at 2 a.m.
Hmm.
Well, that alone probably isn't enough. It's okay, yeah, emergencies happen depending on the business, the industry. Maybe they couldn't sleep and needed to get something off their chest, but it's still a
Yeah.
flag. It's something that gets targeted. But
And the
also,
first thing that you do is, of
yeah,
course, every time you log into the computer, of course, is you open up PowerShell and you type in "Who am I?" Right? That's something that we also do all the time.
yes. Well, especially fans of Jackie Chan and some of his earlier work, like Who Am I? They might do that, but no, probably not. And
No.
not only that, but also I mean, that's a great example. But what happens if you're a operationally minded person with the organization and all of a sudden you're starting to look at all the finance data that you maybe don't typically have access to, or you have a minute access to, but you don't spend that time in there, and all of a sudden you're spending all too much time in there, and all the files are starting to change in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
And
and
hey,
you're
guess what? We
copying them,
also,
and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, we also noticed that that login wasn't from, let's say you're working out of San Jose, and all of a sudden, whether it's your office or your home, those are both known addresses. These are both standards. But now all of a sudden it's logging in from Bangladesh.
Oh yeah, and also that another thing as well that's interesting about user behavior is when we check the IPs
Mm-hmm.
from those places, they sure don't look like a home.
Mm-hmm.
uh, yeah, I mean, there's certain details we could probably get into, but when they're using these compromised routers or they're using these compromised VPSs to do this remote access, like it's relatively like for an analyst and for somebody who has access to Weibo tools like you're talking about, like user behavior analysis, we can tell when it's somebody's house by what it like by the login and by the actions that they perform. I mean, we're going into examples after examples describing an attack chain from like 1,000 feet up where we're acting like it's going to be, you know, Brandon logging into his computer at 2 a.m. But there are actions that only attackers perform,
Mm-hmm.
that nobody else has any rhyme or reason to ever do, outside of maybe in some cases IT.
And having the wrong kind of endpoint protection,
Yeah.
something that's not that extended detection and response, that's not zero trust, that isn't blocking things it doesn't recognize, means it's going to be something that could lead to lateral spread, going to other devices on the network. It means that it's going to be something that might spread without or outside of that one workstation, and you need something at a higher level that can take a look at it at a single pane of glass to aggregate this. In some people's minds, that's a seam. Basically, for those who aren't exposed to that, something that captures logs and can alert on them if there's suspicious activity, but that's all well and good if it's going to somebody like Vaughn, who is a human and sleeps
Mhm.
at least what are you up to? 5 hours a night now? No, yeah, I
Four to
forgot.
five, yeah.
Yeah, I forgot. You're old school. You like to get those 8 hours where you can, right?
Never
No,
actually.
never. I
I've
gotcha.
never.
The
No,
life
it's
of the
four to
security
five.
analyst, right? But
Yeah,
we hit a point where, okay, what if this happens like right as you're laying down, you're the one that's receiving the logs. It's 4 hours now until you see that and can respond. This gets back to some of those automated controls, bringing in things like artificial intelligence to respond to it, or frankly, having somebody or a group, a security operations center, like one which Vaughn works, that is monitoring these or has elements monitoring these things 24/7. And Vaughn can't do it by himself. I can't do it by myself. We see millions of logs per hour. How do we filter out the things that are good, the things that are suspicious from the things that are obviously bad? And we need to use those tools to break it in and make sure that we're getting it down to a more manageable level. Conversely, AI and machine learning can't do it all either. There's certain things that it needs to. It has to be this partnership between man and machine as it exists today.
yeah. There's too much information. There's not enough security professionals, and AI has been widely used in cybersecurity for a long, long time because of just the raw amount of data to process. Um, and that's why we're dependent on these tools to do this work. Um,
The same way the
because
attackers are for improving some of their attack vectors.
oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, those phishing emails that you were talking about, I send. I use ChatGPT and GoPilot to write an enormous amount of them
Mm-hmm.
um, because they're so good at that toneless support email that you'll get from an organization that I'm like, you know, you know how they said that Benjamin Franklin wasn't allowed to write the Declaration of Independence because they thought he'd put a joke in it. It's the same way with me in
I
phishing
haven't heard
emails.
that one, but yeah, I'm similar to you in that way.
Yeah, and ChatGPT doesn't do that. There's no flair. There's no personality to it. There's no, English as a second language uh, kind of tells that a lot of people have been trained to look for because so many people think that they're impervious to attack because they can
Mm.
see typos. Those don't exist anymore. And ideally, when like the rate at which we're finding vulnerabilities out in the world and the rate at which patches are being released and proof of concepts or POCs are being released publicly, I, there's probably people out there who want to pretend that's not AI and it's just something else that's going on. But a portion of that is because of AI. It's analyzing open source code. People are openly putting up POCs. The barrier of entry is so much lower on the offensive side because of these AI tools that the rate from something being reported as a vulnerability to something being reported as a known exploited vulnerability um, is so slow, and the rate at discovery is creating such a backlog of vulnerability registrations that um, trying to stay on top of it all without any kind of automation is going to be nearly impossible. Sorry, I went off on a
No,
tangent.
I think that's great, Vaughn. Like you bring in the things that really matter, that it's not as simple as it once was. And I think you highlight that very well. I think it's something that people need to be aware of, that it's not, I mean, let's go back to the doctors and use the medical examples you were earlier. The doctor doesn't go in and you give them a list of symptoms and they go, it's exactly this, it's 100% this, this is the only thing it could possibly be. Here's your prescription and this will make it all go away. It's usually we need to do more tests, or it could be an element of, it could be, it could be this. I'm going to give you a prescription because there's not a risk for you taking this prescription. It could clear it up. If you still have problems, come back to me. the prescriptions, the medications have their own side effects. We have to make sure, for instance, if we're using this analogy across the board, well, okay, those side effects in security might be something like, well, now people can't do their jobs because we've secured things too far.
Hmm.
Or maybe we've done something that is now leading towards not necessarily misinformation, but like the data is not coming through correctly because it's missing certain elements from a database. Some of the numbers are missing, or it's not as a clear representation. There's caution to this, so we always have to be careful in thinking about how this works within your business and your day-to-day workflows, and how you're going to be operational and be able to be a successful business while making sure that you stay safe. And that's why we like these tools that can bring it in. I think I was hearing numbers about even like on the false positive level for some of the MDR that we use. False positives was something like 3 or 4%, which is pretty
Hmm.
low. And if it's 3 or 4%, what does that mean? Well, your account might get locked out and you're getting a phone call within 2 to 5 minutes. So you're getting that locked out. What's the alternative?
Yeah.
That you're going to be down a lot longer if it gets through. So having these tools, these automations that can be in place, erring on the side of caution and security instead of being that person or that organization that thinks, it's never going to happen to me. I'm not a target. We're not a target. I don't have anything of value to offer. Everybody has it, whether it's data, money, whatever that case might be. You have to start thinking of this in terms of, what am I going to do when they come for me? Not in
Yeah, well, the
terms
when
of,
is the important part of that sentence, I think.
absolutely. So Vaughn, we've covered a whole array of topics today. I want to get things wrapped up here. I don't know if you had anything closing you wanted to bring up as we're winding things down.
Um, I don't have anything really to bring up too much. I feel
Fair
like we've
enough.
covered so much that
Yeah, I know, like when we were putting this together, there was certainly some paring down that had to happen. It's one of those things that we can go really far afield. There's so much more that we can cover. Hopefully this is something that everybody's received. I want to thank everybody for joining us, for tuning in to whether you've seen this all the way through from start to finish, or you've been tuning into various segments. Thank you so much. Big thank you, Vaughn, for sharing your insights with us today.
thank you for having me, Brandon.
All right, everybody, until next time, stay safe, stay secure, don't give in to the fear. Thanks so much.